Hola, mi gente. How are you doing today? I'm Makeda Valletta, and I'm live on my page, Makeda Valletta Travels. I hope you all are doing well today. I haven't done a video here in a while, but just been busy with life. But in case you're unfamiliar with me, I'm a native New Yorker who lives in Chicago, and I travel a lot in the country and out of the country. And I don't always document every place I go because I just be moving around. But right now, I want to talk about all the stuff that's been going on in Mexico. And there's been like so many different thoughts in my mind around this because of what's going on in the US with ICE and borders and stuff like that. So, of course, by now, everybody knows what has happened. That one of the major cartel leaders, El Mencho, was killed, and the cartel started to terrorize various places. And to me, like, I'm just gonna tell you for one thing, I've never been into like narco movies and like stories like that. Like, it's just incredibly, like, makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. So I hear a lot of people saying, like, first of all, let me just say this. I love Mexican people. I love Mexico. Okay, Mexico is one of my favorite countries. It's a beautiful country. I have been to Mexico a few times. I've been to Tulum twice, Playa del Carmen, and Puerto Morelos, which are all on the Caribbean coast. I've been to Sayulita. The last time I was in Mexico, I was in Sayulita. And Sayulita is like 25 minutes from Puerto Vallarta. So you fly into the Puerto Vallarta airport, and then I was in Sayulita, and another town I went to on the coast of Oaxaca. That was in the South Pacific coast. And I've been in Mexico City twice. Mexico City is one of my favorite cities in the world. I didn't expect it to be so nice. Like, it's beautiful like Paris, okay? It's beautiful like Chicago. You hear a lot of negative press about Chicago, but Chicago is a really beautiful city and very clean. And so is Mexico City. Mexico City has like the population of New York City, but yet it's really clean. And so now when I went to Mexico City, I was warned by like one of my friends who's half Mexican, half Greek, and he has family in Mexico City, and he warned me, and many people warned me about Mexico City. However, I went there twice and I felt okay, except I do remember one time drifting off somewhere, going to a market and feeling like this man was about to kidnap me, but my Uber came just in time. However, and there's also a lot of Americans who moved to Mexico. Hey, Bahia, I haven't seen you in so long. There's a lot of Americans who moved to Mexico, and I'm a critical thinker, right? So I hear people say things like, "Oh, America, they're so stressed living in America, and America is so violent." And America does have a violence problem, right? But then you choose to move to Mexico, and you think that it's so safe because it's very beautiful, and you a lot of times are in touristy areas, even though there has been cartel shootings on the beach in Cancun. So when people say they keep that violence out of the touristy areas, sometimes it is in the touristy areas as well. Now, and so I felt safe in Mexico, but I feel safe in America too. Okay, like, I live in Chicago, which a lot of people are scared of, and a lot of crazy things do happen in Chicago. But when I'm walking around Chicago, it's like a pretty city, and like, I've been here for 9 years, never had any issues. Never had an issue in New Orleans, which is very dangerous. Spent a lot of time there. Spent a lot of time in Philly. Spent a lot of time in Oakland. Spent a lot of time in Detroit. Spent a lot of time in Baltimore. All these cities that are really, really dangerous. And I've never had an issue. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous, right? It doesn't mean because I've been to New Orleans a lot and never had a problem, just because it hasn't touched me does not mean that it's safe, right? So I'm very much aware of that, and I'm very careful with how I move. But I hear a lot of people saying, like, this cartel issue, right? Like, I see a lot of people who will say, well, there wouldn't be a cartel problem if Americans didn't have a drug problem, right? Americans didn't have this, there wasn't this need. And I feel like I'm huge on people taking accountability and responsibility for their own actions and the roles they play and stuff. And so one could make the argument that the cartels wouldn't exist with the drugs if Americans didn't have a consumption problem. But there's two issues with that. Number one, there wouldn't be a drug problem if there were no drugs for people to get, right? So, and you can also, and I think that when people get addicted to drugs, a lot of times when people get addicted to hard drugs, there's something wrong, okay? So that can add to the fact that some people think that if all Americans are like, this is just like the perfect place and everybody here is fine and has no issues. You have a lot of immigrants who come to America and think that. And they'll call Americans lazy because they're struggling, or they think as soon as they come to America, they're going to be rich. And the amount of drug addicts should show you that there's obviously some hurt and pain and issues that people suffer with. Because usually when people turn to hardcore drugs, it's because of some type of personal trauma, right? But then on the flip side, a lot of the drugs that are being brought into America from Mexico and China has been fentanyl. And the amount of fentanyl deaths, I'm not sure what it is and what it was in 2025, but for several years, in the past few years, fentanyl has been the number one cause of death for all Americans, okay? And nobody was trying to do fentanyl. They were being poisoned. They might have thought they were buying cocaine. They might have thought that they were buying pills. Opioids. Okay, hopefully you can still hear me. Somebody just called me. But hold on a minute. You have a lot of people who are addicted to opioids, and that's because of the medical industry, right? So people who get addicted to opioids, it's because the doctor prescribed opioids to them and they got addicted. That's not their fault. You know, you can blame the medical industry. Hold on a minute. Hold on. Okay. You can blame the medical industry, but that's not their fault. Now, if they're trying to get opioids and they're being given fentanyl, and fentanyl was not what they were trying to get. A lot of these people who are dying of fentanyl overdoses were not trying to take fentanyl. They thought they were taking cocaine or whatever pill they were taking, okay? And then they were poisoned with fentanyl. And that was coming in the country from Mexico and China. And there are Mexican and Chinese cartels all throughout the U.S., okay? First, I started hearing about them in California with these illegal cannabis grows, which is why when I first found out about this is when I stopped buying cannabis from the weed man and I started going to the dispensary, because there are Mexican and Chinese and some other group that have cartels growing with illegal cannabis grows in California, where they're stealing water. They're in poor towns where the law enforcement there gets paid no money. These cartels have serious weaponry. They have lookouts. They can see when law enforcement is coming and they scatter. They're trafficking people into the country. So the people they have working on these illegal cannabis grows are all people who've been trafficked into the country, and these by cartels. And these people are told you're going to work on a strawberry plantation or whatever. You're going to work off, you'll work the money off or whatever. And they're basically trafficking and enslaving people on illegal cannabis grows, and then using really toxic chemicals that are banned in this country to put on the cannabis so the animals don't eat it. They're poisoning the land. They're poisoning the animals. Okay? They're stealing and depleting the water. And local law enforcement can't deal with it. And so I first found out about this happening in California. Then I heard it happening like in all those like plain states out in the West. Then I started hearing people that I know from like Maine and stuff like that telling me this, okay? And so it's a problem. And word on the street is that because of the borders being closed in this country and it being harder for people to come in the country, that the cartels are not making as much money as they were before. And now it's making competition with them even thicker. And now if they run around and make people not want to come to Mexico, they're messing with their money even more. And Mexico and America have this intertwined, we're intertwined. We're next to each other. But I feel like Canada, they're more further removed. And even though I've been seeing that Cartel has been going to Canada as well. And, in Chicago, where there's a large Mexican population, a large probably other Central Americans and stuff in Chicago. And when Chicago was letting, illegal immigrants come and was dumping them in the hood, a lot of legal Hispanic immigrants in Chicago were complaining because they said, we fled our countries to flee these dangerous people. And now they're walking around in our neighborhoods. So I definitely am not a fan of just allowing anybody to run up in this country. And people who are protesting ICE, it's like ICE, yes, you can argue that perhaps they should have different methods. And part of the issue with their methods is that in the sanctuary cities, in the sanctuary cities like Chicago, like New York, like, all the sanctuary cities, they won't cooperate with law enforcement. Law enforcement won't cooperate with ICE. So under Obama, if an illegal immigrant was arrested for a crime, the law enforcement would turn him over to ICE. But since local law enforcement won't cooperate with ICE, ICE has to then go snatch people out their cars or go get them off the street. And not everybody that ICE is detaining is innocent. Not every people want to keep saying, oh, people came in the country illegally. They're trying to, make a better life. That's true for some of them. And some of them, the way they're trying to make a better life might be crime. Okay? That's true for some of them, but that's still besides the point if you're in a country illegally. As somebody who travels, there's a traveling page. I've been in many countries. I respect the laws of that country. And if I'm not supposed to be there, if I overstay my visa and I gotta go, I gotta go. I wouldn't fight to stay there if I wasn't there legally. I wouldn't. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like every country has borders. Every country, in Mexico right now, they're protesting. In Mexico City, they're protesting Americans. They're protesting Americans come in here. They're holding up signs telling us, don't bring our culture there and speak Spanish. Just complaining. And it's like, well, you're complaining about Americans coming to Mexico. But first of all, if Americans didn't come to Mexico, Mexico would be that much more broke. Okay. Because how are you guys really making money? A lot of it is off of tourism and people coming there. And Americans and Canadians are your number one tourists, really, right? Americans are not coming there and taking jobs and lowering wages and starting gangs and stuff like that. But in America, I feel like America has been, despite the, when America says we can't take anymore, or people who are not supposed to be here have to go, all of a sudden we're xenophobic. But people respect it in other countries. Okay? And law enforcement in other countries is scary. Okay? Law enforcement in Mexico is scary. Not only do they try to bribe you all the time, okay, and they're riding around with their faces covered, law enforcement in Mexico. Okay? And why is that? Because they could be a target. Perhaps that's why ICE is moving around with their face covered, right? I just know that you could be against that. People could be in America and be against that, and then they'll go to a country like Mexico, where that's how law enforcement is. And nobody's protesting it. You're not going to go there and protest it, and the people there aren't going to be there protesting it with you. And those law enforcement are really scary. And people don't think that they can test them, right? So as somebody who's traveled to many countries, spent a lot of time in Colombia, spent a lot of time in Cuba. Cuba, you can't even record the police. That's illegal. So if you take your phone out and you think you're recording the police, totally illegal in Cuba. Now, I'm not saying that it should be or whatever. I'm just saying that law enforcement in America, to me, is not nearly the worst or as scary. And I think that America in general is more tolerant with illegal people being in the country or just immigrants, period, than a lot of other countries. And again, I'm a critical thinker, and it's just like, let's really be real and deal with the facts and look at the whole picture. It's easy people to just run with a narrative. But these Latin gangs are very scary, okay? And for them to wage war on the U.S. and Mexico, there's people that I know that are like, they're not going to try to act crazy in the United States. They're not going to try to harm American citizens in Mexico because they know it will really mess with their money. With the way that they were acting, it's like, who knows who could get caught in the crossfires. And again, I really love Mexico. Like, I was really trying to go to Merida. Merida is a town on the Caribbean coast. There's actually a lot of Black Americans in Merida. I know people who live in Merida. People are always like, oh, it's so safe. And I just know as a traveler, like some places feel safe and they actually are safe. Some places feel safe and they're not that safe. Okay. And Chicago, again, is a city where some people will tell you, oh, Chicago's not that dangerous. It's an exaggeration. A lot of people will say that. Okay. Because Chicago is so beautiful and it is so peaceful. And when you come here, you're like, this is the city I heard about. Like, it doesn't seem like all these crazy, shootings and violence, but it happens. Okay. As somebody from New York, when we first saw the movie Boys in the Hood and these LA movies where it's sunny, they have palm trees, they live in a house, they have a car, they have a front yard, they have a backyard, and yet they're shooting up the block. We didn't understand that. Like, what are you so mad at? Like, you living in the hood is sunshine every day, palm trees, house, front yard, backyard, car. You live in the hood in New York or Chicago or something, you didn't have a car, it'd be cold as hell sometimes. You might live in the projects, you don't have, it's just like, so didn't understand, like, so there's a lot of beautiful places that are not safe, okay? And so I'm very cautious and careful with how I move. And again, I've been to that area. Well, it was happening in multiple parts of the country, but Puerto Vallarta and Sayulita, really nice areas. And you have people that say they've been going there for 20 years and never had an issue. And there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I will never go to Mexico for this reason. And it's one of those things like you just don't know. Like, I feel like I'm cautious with where I go places and I pay attention at all times. Plenty of people go to Mexico and loved it and have felt safe. And plenty of people have gone to Mexico and been bribed or kidnapped or had issues. Apparently there's a wall in Mexico City of people who've been kidnapped, so you definitely got to be careful. But anyhow, I just want to talk about like the intertwinedness of Mexico and America. And I feel like, okay, another thing, when the Mexicans holding the signs telling Americans don't bring their culture here, but yet when I see Mexicans protesting ICE in America, and they're burning up American flags. They were burning up all types of stuff in the streets of LA. To me, that is you bringing your culture here. Okay? This is Black History Month, and, I've been quiet about a lot of things because I constantly see people criticizing the leaders from the 60s, criticizing Martin Luther King, criticizing Jesse Jackson, and I grew up around people who were on the front lines doing the work during that time. And I've been hearing the conversations all my life. Ever since I was a kid, there were mistakes I felt like those Black leaders made, okay? Certain things, and my dad would explain to me, okay, why. Like, I felt like there was always an overemphasis on Africa, okay? And us being African, and Africa. And when I had this conversation with my dad, because my mother's family, they would always be like, we're not African. It's 10 toes down, okay? My mom's sister, who's like 86, she 10 toes down. And they came out of Florida and Alabama, right? And I remember my dad telling me, because I felt like, okay, Black people in America overemphasize the African. When we've been told that, but nobody can prove it, nobody can point to anything, nobody knows what tribes are in their family. But I personally never met a Black American who didn't know about their American Indian tribes in their family. I've never met one, okay? Most people I know, that they've been told. And we're told not to listen to our family and listen to the government that's trying to brainwash and confuse us and take us off of our land, right? So, and I remember my dad telling me back then, that a lot of Black Americans that he knew that they had Indian blood, but they weren't proud of it because they were taught that the Indians were weak, and so they had to go get Africans, so they were told they were weak, and my dad said it was so hard being a Black man, they didn't want to add that to it, because to them it was like another weakness, another battle to fight. That made no sense to me. Because I'm like, we're on this land. Our parents were born and buried on this land. Our grandparents were born and buried on this land. Our great-grandparents, for as far back as we can trace, documented on this land. So why would you ignore your ancestors that are from this land? That's the ultimate level of disrespect to me. Okay. So I've always had issues with that, but and it was also the civil rights people of the 60s who fought to allow immigrants from all over the world to come here easier, right? And a lot of younger, when I say younger, I mean people in their 60s and younger, Black Americans are upset by that because a lot of the people who've immigrated to this country are not our friends. Okay, and I grew up in New York City around all kinds of immigrants, and I had friends from all over the world, and a lot of things were cool, but a lot of times too, if you had real conversations about things their family said, and even lately I've seen plenty of stuff on the internet of Caribbeans or Africans talking greasy, and so it's like, to me, I don't understand immigrating to a country and doing that. I don't understand, like, if I would decide to move to Haiti or move to Nigeria or whatever country, I can't imagine going there and talking down to the people, getting on the internet and calling them dirty or, just criticizing in the way that I see a lot of immigrant groups do, or calling them lazy or whatever. You're literally in my country, and you're in my country because we fought for you to be here type stuff, So you have a lot of younger people who are upset with them because of that. There was a reason why I brought that up. What was I about to tie that into? There was a reason why I brought that up. Damn, I just lost my train of thought. I was talking about damn it, I forgot what I was saying. There was a reason why I brought that up, and I just can't remember. My brain's like in all these different places. When people say things, okay, I don't remember if this is my original point, but this is something else I wanted to say. When people say, oh, America is a country of immigrants, nobody can be illegal on stolen land, right? Somebody could say the same about Mexico, right? I don't understand, like, I don't see the difference between Mexico and America. Or people say, oh, Mexicans are indigenous. Somebody could say Americans are indigenous, right? I'm American. My family's indigenous to here, and there's plenty of us like that, right? But then somebody will argue, well, there's been all kinds of immigrants that have come to America. Well, there's been all kinds of immigrants that have come to Mexico. Does anybody know the history of Mexico? There's a lot of Europeans that immigrated to Mexico, Lebanese, Chinese, okay? There was a whole trans-Pacific slave trade where Mexico brought in a whole bunch of Chinese slaves and started calling them Chinos and stuff, So all Mexicans are not indigenous. There were more Africans taken to Mexico than there were taken to America during the slave trade. The United States had the smallest amount of Africans out of the whole Americas brought to America. And all of the slaves in America were not Africans. A lot of them were not Africans. Okay? But nobody calls them African Mexican, right? Nobody says African Jamaican, African Haitian. When Jamaicans and Haitians are very African. Nobody says African Cuban. There's people straight up African in Cuba, speaking African languages and everything. Nobody says African Brazilian. Okay? But then they call us African American. And I'm not saying Afro. There's a difference between Afro and African. Okay? I'm saying that we're the only ones that get called African something, and we're the least African. Okay? So Mexico also has had Africans brought there as slaves. Mexico has also had a bunch of Europeans. Mexico was also colonized by the Europeans, the Spanish. So can I go to Mexico and refuse to leave and say, well, no one's illegal on stolen land? Right now in Mexico City, where they're tearing down American businesses and protesting Americans coming there, can I say, well, I'm Mexican because this is the same land. It's all America, right? So if you're American, I'm Mexican. If you have the right to be in America illegally because it's stolen land, which makes no sense, or because it's a country full of immigrants, then I could go to Mexico and say the same thing. I could go to Colombia and say the same thing. I could go to Brazil and say the same thing. All those countries are countries of immigrants. All those countries are stolen land, right? But I don't see people doing that. So to me, it's just the disrespect. I feel like when it comes to America, there's a level of disrespect and that I don't see shown to other countries when it comes to that. And many countries in the world don't even allow you to wave flags. Some other countries, ask ChatGPT, and it will tell you. Most countries don't, and especially not in protest. Even in Haiti, it's illegal. I see Haitian flags all the time. You can't do that there, right? But if an American expresses some type of, we're xenophobic, so. And to me, as an American who's gone to Mexico, we always think, oh, it's beautiful. A lot of Americans move there, right? You have Mexicans in America who say Mexico is the best country. But if that's the case, and you have Americans who are moving there because they think so too, why aren't you there? What's the answer to that? I'm just a critical thinker, so I like to ask questions. What is it that the Americans who go to Mexico who think it's better than the United States, they choose to live there, it's so beautiful, it's so amazing, there's so much less stress is what they say. And then you have Mexicans in America burning down the streets because they don't want to go back to Mexico, but yet they're claiming Mexico is the best country and they love Mexico so much. Why aren't you enjoying it like the Americans who left? And then when the Mexicans are complaining in Mexico about Americans coming there and that the prices of stuff is going up and it's affecting their housing, but when Americans tell Mexicans that, and other immigrant groups, that you coming to our country, our neighborhoods in mass, is affecting our housing and is affecting our jobs, because then we're not competing for jobs with them when we move to Mexico. We're not taking their jobs, right? We're not lowering their rates. But we can't speak about how Mexicans coming and other immigrants mass immigrating to America affects us. But even though, yes, they may contribute to society as well, they're also taking and, whatever, and contributing to lowering of wages and other things. Nobody wants to hear that when we say that, but people understand it when Mexicans say that about Americans coming there. South Africans right now kicking out, they don't want Americans there. They don't want Nigerians there. Ghanaians are mad. They want the Nigerians out. Everybody's complaining about jobs and work, da-da-da-da. But Americans can't say that. And Americans aren't holding up signs, attacking Mexicans and tearing their businesses apart the way they are doing to Americans in Mexico City. Okay? And I don't feel like when people say there would be no cartel if Americans didn't have this drug consumption problem, it's like nobody can have a drug consumption problem if there's no drugs. And the cartels, that's not the only thing they're doing. The fact that they torture, the way that they torture people, the way they extort people, and it's not just drug stuff. And then a lot of the drugs they've been bringing in the country lately has been fentanyl, which has been killing people who are not trying to even take fentanyl. They thought that they bought cocaine or they bought pills or whatever, and they got poisoned. And that's coming from Mexico and China. There are Mexican and Chinese cartels in the U.S. Okay? And we don't need that problem here. So to think that, we don't need border security. First of all, when Trump first came in office, the cartels in Mexico had waged war on border security. What gangs do we have in America that are trying to wage war on border security going into Mexico or going into Canada? You know what I'm saying? Totally not cool. Okay? So, I was talking to a friend of mine. His cousin was like, I don't know, some military special forces, something. He helped go take out Pablo Escobar. He was involved in a lot of stuff. And he basically just told me, like, his recommendation about going to Mexico was like, just wait till the State Department tells you it's okay. Because the cartel issue is, always going to be there. And it's not always that bad, even though, and plenty of people go there and have not had an issue and yada, yada, yada. Ow, 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 ooh, ooh. I just banged my knee. Ow. But America and Mexico do have, do affect each other. And I like to be fair on both sides. I like to be fair. I like to be balanced. I know in LA, I'm from New York where, it was Puerto Ricans and Dominicans were the main Hispanics. And There wasn't much displacement. But from what I hear from my people in LA, Mexicans have seriously displaced Black Americans in several areas, especially like in Compton. That was like, used to be like, I don't know if it was like 80%, 90% Black. Now it's like 17% Black. And it's been Mexicans. And I know a lot of Black Americans from LA who have said, I remember when I was like a teenager or in my early 20s, I didn't understand why Blacks and Mexicans were fighting in LA. I'm like, why would they not get along with each other? They should be united. You know, the Mexicans, they're coming here for that, you know, the better life. They're just trying to survive. They're trying to do their thing. And why can't the Black people understand that? I remember I thought that. And then Black people from LA told me how much a lot of Mexicans discriminated against them, the racist stuff they would do, how they'd be attacking them, all kinds of stuff. And so they would say the tension between Blacks and Mexicans in LA is because of the Mexicans. Now, me personally, I've never had an issue with a Mexican, but they weren't really a part of my world in New York, you know? And New York is unique in the sense that it's probably like the one place in America where Black Americans and Hispanics really get along. We don't have tension in New York. Miami got tension with them racist white Cubans who I cannot stand, okay? I never experienced blatant racism in my life until I freaking went to Miami. It was around those racist, corny ass white Cubans in Miami. And they are corny, okay? So you have that going on. And then New York has Puerto Ricans and Dominicans where we get along, we co-create, it's all good. And then the rest of the country is mostly Mexicans. And there's a lot of conflict between Black Americans and Mexicans. Even in Chicago, they would tell me that there was conflict. Now, I've been in Chicago for 9 years, never had a problem with a Mexican, okay? Love them down. And people say that a lot of times it's gang-related tension or whatever. But I just know that I don't see Americans moving to other countries and forming gangs. And there's so many immigrant groups that have formed gangs in this country. And then they want to blame America for everything. Like, America might play a role with certain things, but so do you and your culture. Because I've been to Haiti, okay? I went to Haiti in 2010. And the gang problem in Haiti, like, okay, we have Haitian gangs in Miami. And they could tell you that they formed a gang for whatever reason. And then you have the gangs in Haiti who, they're like, where are they getting these weapons? They're getting these weapons from America. They're probably getting them from Haitian gangs in America that's getting them to them. But how you get access to weapons, I have access to these weapons in America. Am I going to get them and start shooting people? You know what I'm saying? Like, my dad being from the South, he told me all Black people in the South had guns when he was growing up. And people weren't shooting each other. Okay? So you also have to take responsibility for terrorizing your own people, okay? Where you got the guns from is one issue, and you can't be one-sided. If you want to say that Haiti and Mexico wouldn't have so much violence if they didn't have access to American guns, right? Well, I could say that America wouldn't have such a drug problem if they didn't have access to the drugs you're sending here. So don't be one-sided with that. Don't say, oh, well, the cartels wouldn't exist if America didn't have a drug consumption problem. Well, I could say, well, Americans wouldn't have guns to sell to all you gangs if you guys didn't have a gang problem. You know, that can go both ways. So take responsibility. America is responsible for certain things. But people want to dump, like with Haiti, everything's America's fault. No, some of that is your fault. Mexico, okay, some of the stuff, and people flee the country. When America was really bad in this country, in the segregated South, okay, the segregated South, all through Jim Crow, all the, people in the South being lynched all the time. Black Americans didn't run to other people's countries by the hundreds of thousands and millions. We didn't do that. We fought. We did the work over years and years and years and years and years, which has allowed all the people who fled to come here and live somewhat of a comfortable life. And it wouldn't have gotten better if we all left. And Black Americans never expressed the love for our country the way a lot of immigrants in America do, who fled their country and they love it so much and they want to tell you all day, and I'm from this country, and wave their flag all day, but they won't go help. They won't go help make their country better. If all your finest minds are leaving your country, which is messed up where Cuba didn't let them leave, That's messed up. But if all your finest minds are leaving your country, it's going to drain your country. So if you claim to love it so much, why are you all running? I can understand a few, but large amounts, the more you guys do that, your country will never get better. So these are just thoughts about the interconnectedness between, the Americas has an interconnected history, interconnected stuff. The same way I have felt safe in Mexico, although it may not have always been safe. I've always felt safe in the United States, even though it has not always been safe. So when people tell these stories, I grew up in New York City. I never had an issue. My twin brother never had an issue, never got jumped by anybody. I didn't see anybody get killed. I do know some people that got killed growing up, but I didn't see that. Like people have these stories, I saw somebody get shot. I saw all this trauma. That wasn't it. I've traveled to many dangerous cities in America. A lot of the dangerous cities in America: Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, Oakland, New Orleans hoods, East St. Louis, Baltimore, DC, Atlanta. All of those cities are shoot 'em up cities, okay? And multiple places in the world that could be considered, and I've never had an issue because I'm very careful with how I move. It doesn't mean I'm invincible, but I'm very cautious and careful how I move. But this idea that like Americans are living in fear every day because America's so violent and I'm always afraid I could get shot, that's not how I feel. And I'm not in America stressed out because I'm black. I'm not like, oh my God, the police. Like, I'm more scared of the police in other countries, okay? I'm more scared of the police in Colombia, in Mexico, in Jamaica, in Nigeria. Like, I'm more afraid of those police. Okay, so I just have to say that as somebody who lives in America, because I just feel like a lot of times this narrative is like America is a war zone and it's so scary here. And people have different realities. I'm just saying I move around and people will say that about America, but then say they feel safe in Mexico. So at the end of the day, I'm careful with how I move. I look at stats and I know that the cartel doesn't run America. And I cannot live in a country with like no real law and order and that kind of stuff happening. And I really want to go back to Mexico. I really want to go to Merida. So anybody who's watching this video, if you are in Mexico, living in Mexico right now, tell me what areas it is that you're in and how you feel. Do you feel safe in regards to what's happened recently with the killing of El Mencho and just in general? I love to learn in that way. So I think I've got my point across about the interconnectedness between Mexico and America. And they've waged war in America. So let's see what that means. Hopefully nothing crazy happens in this country because we do have Mexican cartel all through this country as well. And yeah, I'm just going to end it on that. I hope you guys are well, and I'll see you soon. Bye.